Thank you to our sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Build accessible, powerful WordPress forms with Gravity Forms. Flexible tools for creators, developers, and teams of all sizes. Platinum sponsor, WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Platinum sponsor, Woo. WooCommerce is the open-source e-commerce platform built on WordPress, helping merchants worldwide sell, manage, and grow their businesses. Gold sponsors, Ally Web Accessibility. Equalize Digital, websites for everyone. GoDaddy, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Yoast. Silver sponsors, Aardvark, Code Geek, Your Vision, Our Talent, One Team, Kinetic Iris, Kinsta, Pressable, Second Melody. Bronze sponsors, Nine Planets Hosting, Engage, Draw Attention, Multidots, NerdPress, OSAM Studio, AusEY, Australian Web Accessibility Initiative, Progress Planner, Quality Logic, Sharp, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Stellar WP, Termageddon, Web Yes.
Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2025. My name is Jeremy Rivera, and I'm a developer advocate from GQ Systems. Thank you for joining us for a game-changing approach to accessibility education with Olivia Richter. Olivia is a web designer passionate about creating accessible digital solutions. Since founding her own company in 2023, she has been creating user-friendly websites with WordPress that prioritize accessibility standards. For Olivia, creative projects are more than just work. They are heartfelt endeavors that combine functionality with inclusivity, ensuring the web is a welcoming place for everyone. She believes accessibility should be as engaging as it is essential. This philosophy led her to develop a unique digital escape game that flips the rules of access, challenging players to rethink how they interact with the web. Please feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Use the chat to connect with other attendees.
Hello. Today I'm going to talk about a game-changing approach to accessibility education. I'm Olivia Richter. I have a brown pixie cut, I wear glasses and a black shirt. I'm a WordPress web designer by day and an accessibility advocate by passion. My job is building inclusive websites, but my superpower is learning new things and getting lost in side quests. The last part is probably how I ended up here. Not necessarily to teach you, but to take you through my journey of getting people on board with digital accessibility. See, here's the thing I've learned. We all say we care about inclusion, but getting people to act on it, that's where the real adventure begins. Let's start from the beginning. People create digital experiences. I know, incredibly insightful. But if you really think about it, that is where the issue of inaccessible experiences has its root. Most of those people never face the barriers they create. They are like chefs who don't taste their own food, serving up dishes that poison some of the diners. And they don't even realize it. Why? Because when you can glide through a website with a mouse, why would you question a broken tab order? When you can see colors perfectly, why stress about contrast? Exclusion isn't malice, mostly. It's ignorance on autopilot. We call this issue the empathy gap, an inability for people to empathize with others, in this case, people with disabilities, leading them to ignore the barriers that disabled people face every day. But let's call it what it is. Most people don't give a damn until it happens to them. Disability is the thought of, it won't be me, until of course it is. Broken arms, aging eyes, situational limits, or getting into a car accident. Disability is the world's most inclusive club. So, how do we close the empathy gap? How do we get every developer, every designer, every editor to create while having people with disabilities in mind? Well, it's complicated. A common way we try to get people to empathize with people with disabilities is to simulate the disability for them. This can look something like using a wheelchair for an hour, or you blindfold yourself to simulate being blind. Think about these blindfolded trust walks. Or using earplugs, where you simulate being hard of hearing or deaf. Let me give you a personal example. I visited this museum in the Netherlands, the Museum in Nijmegen, where they take you on a tour in complete darkness. Unlike in this picture here, where you can rarely see a chair and the floor, it was completely dark. You're led by a guide you meet in the darkness, so you can't see them. They don't see you either, not just because of the darkness, but because they're visually impaired. In the dark, you're navigating everyday spaces. Like a home, you cross a street and you end up in a bar. All without relying on sight. While enjoying your drink, your guide asks you what you think they look like. I have to say, it was incredibly eye-opening. While it was just a brief experience for me, the real purpose hits home. The simulation of blindness can help people with degenerative vision prepare for the future. Imagine training your other senses to handle daily tasks. Here's a simulation of dyslexia. The letters in the text changed places and it's hard to read. It's a great reminder that what seems simple to you can be a real challenge when your brain processes information differently. With all that said, does it work? Does simulating the experience of people with disabilities work to get non-disabled people to create more accessible experiences? It depends. Targeted simulations can be surprisingly effective when used like a spotlight, not a floodlight. You need to show why color contrast matters? A quick color blindness simulation slaps the designer with an "oh wow, I literally can't read that" moment no guideline can replicate. Here we have such a simulation of green blindness with a yellow forest in the background and text in the foreground that, well, I can't read. Also the same simulation with complete color blindness in black and white. And this is the picture without the simulation. The forest stays yellow, but you have red text on top of it that reads, "Can you read that?" It's not a great contrast, but that's the whole point. While simulations, like blindfolding, sometimes stick where theory fails, there are a few reasons. First, they're visceral. They expose hidden design flaws and they make barriers feel real. Nothing makes a manager prioritize accessibility like struggling to use their own product. But there are a lot of limitations. Let's get into some of them. Disabilities aren't one size fits all. We need to acknowledge that disabilities, even specific diagnoses, do not always cause the same experience for every affected person. You can see two different simulations of diabetic retinopathy here. There are different dark spots in the field of view. On one, there are smaller and more dots, and on the other simulation, there are a few bigger, more irregular spots. This means that the simulation can at best only simulate the temporary experience of a specific person. More likely, it will simulate the experience of no one. A temporary simulation is not the same as lived experience. Spending an hour in a wheelchair teaches you how to spend an hour in a wheelchair. What's missed is the exhaustion of planning every route, the stairs, the broken elevator, the train and bus that can't accommodate you at the moment, the plane crew that destroys your wheelchair, the bureaucracy with the healthcare system, and, to tie it all together, the discrimination. Even more if a disability is combined with factors such as race or class. Intersectionality plays additionally to it. Intersectionality is the intersection of multiple forms of discrimination. Simulations can distort reality. They can be misleading. You might think you know about the capabilities of a disabled person, but you didn't train and you don't have the context. This can lead to pity for the disabled person, to frustration and the idea of incompetence, which does not reflect the experience of people with disabilities. It can be patronizing. Simulations can reduce disabilities to stereotypes like all blind people use Braille, or, more relevant to this talk, all blind people use a screen reader. This, of course, is not true. Another issue is the simple fact that some disabilities just cannot be simulated in a way that even remotely matches lived reality. Think about chronic pain. How do you simulate fatigue that builds up over hours? Autistic sensory overload, which isn't just loud noises equals to bad. Another example is the loss of mobility, which can cause issues with some input devices. Like in this picture where the person has a prosthetic hand. People who are used to working with a mouse can understand that some people need websites to work with a keyboard. But too often that ends up being translated into, let's add a bunch of keyboard macros to make our app usable with a keyboard. In reality, this approach often causes even more issues, because the developer didn't understand the problem. We run the risk of giving designers ideas for fixes that do fix the barriers for the simulated disability, but do little to improve the experience of real disabled people. We end up training developers and designers to design for simulations, not people. And we waste time on fixes that can create even new barriers. We also need to address the fact that simulated disabilities are a controversial topic. A simulated disability is trying to portray the experience of people, but only portrays a very narrow part of this experience. And it reduces lived experience to a temporary inconvenience. Furthermore, the simulation of a disability creates the perception that the problem is within the person with the disability, and that we as creators of digital spaces have to adapt our products to their needs. I would see parallels to the medical model of disability, where disability is seen as something that has to be cured or corrected. The focus is on the individual's impairment rather than the system's failure. This model faces a lot of criticism because of its ableist views. So, we always need to contextualize these simulations with the knowledge that the barriers are the problem, not the disabilities, and especially not the people with the disabilities. And then there's the ethical question. Is it appropriate for someone without a disability to pretend to have one, even for educational purposes? Some argue that it can feel dismissive or even exploitative, especially when it's done without the input from the disability community. The uncomfortable truth is, simulations can feel like disability cosplay. People may gain some empathy through a simulation, but is this empathy really directed towards the person with the disability? Maybe, but often in a pitiful way and not empowering. In most cases, this empathy is more likely directed at the perceived reality of the simulation and often ends up solving the wrong problem. To summarize, critics argue this empathy is short-lived and doesn't equate to lived experience. You might prioritize temporary fixes over systemic inclusion. These simulations can reinforce the medical model thinking, where disability is seen as a problem to fix. I want to empathize that I do think that simulations can have merits and can be very useful in some circumstances. But clearly, simulating a disability to encourage empathy is not a catch-all solution to the complex topic of accessibility advocacy. So, what is? The real answer to the empathy gap is listening to people with disabilities. Plain and simple. It's about listening, learning, and committing to creating experiences that work for everyone. The empathy gap doesn't close through simulations, pity, or guesswork. It closes when we shut up and listen. At the end of the day, accessibility isn't about assuming what works. It's about centering disabled voices in design, development, and decision-making. This is shown and shown again. Accessibility improves when designers, developers, creators, manager, and everyone else involved in the process of creating digital experiences has direct conversations with disabled people and actually listens to them. This works so well because, as people, we can empathize really well with the people we meet in our real lives. We understand their experience much better if we see how they interact with our products. There is no real replacement for this process. Watching a screen reader user struggle with your intuitive UI is much more eye-opening than any blindfold exercise. This approach also comes with plenty of other benefits, including but not limited to more diverse viewpoints in product teams, increased adaptability, higher employee retention and satisfaction, better company culture, and many more. When disabled people are part of the process, designs are stress tested early, you don't get these last-minute accessibility patches, innovation thrives, and everyone wins. Think about the curb cut effect, where curb cuts were invented for wheelchairs, but now everyone uses them. For example, if you use a stroller, a bike, a trolley, or you transport heavy stuff. Our goal is to normalize accessibility as a core skill, not a niche checklist. And never ever assume you know better than the people you're designing for. A lot of people hear this and think that I am suggesting that they should need to add people with disabilities to their quality assurance pipeline. And they absolutely should, but this is not just what I am saying. People with disabilities should be involved in every step. They should be involved in every step of the way towards the final product. This solution is not as easy to implement as it sounds. Hiring disabled talent isn't as simple as posting a job ad and waiting for magic to happen. We have the perfect candidate trap. The problem is, companies want unicorns. For example, a senior React developer who is also an accessibility expert and has lived experience. The reality is, you don't need a disability hire, you need great talent who happens to be disabled. The awareness gap. Many companies don't even realize that their product or website is inaccessible and that they should hire people with disabilities. The accessibility paradox. Career pages are often inaccessible. The irony is that companies often say, we can't hire people with disabilities until we fix our site, which we need people with disabilities to help fix. Yes, this takes time and work. But guess what? So does retrofitting accessibility after you've built an exclusionary product. You can't build products for people you refuse to hire. This isn't about charity hiring, it's about closing the empathy gap where it matters most, your payroll. With all these problems in mind, I would argue that there is some space for another approach. This approach, of course, still can't replace the input from the people with the disabilities, but it can address some of the issues with simulating disabilities. And that is simulating barriers. But wait, didn't I just say like 5 minutes ago that simulations are not the way to go? I did, but there's a seemingly subtle difference between simulating disabilities and simulating barriers. So, what am I even talking about? Let me give you an example which we will use to explain the difference and why I think this might be a better approach. A simple and crude way to simulate visual impairment might involve using glasses that restrict peripheral vision, forcing a developer to resize their browser window to fit a narrow field of view. In doing so, they might realize their app doesn't handle different viewport sizes. But it comes with all the problems we talked about before, like shifting the focus to adapting to the disability instead of the barriers within the application. Let's try to simulate a barrier which does not require the user to take on a different kind of persona. What if we designed an application that worked perfectly for narrow viewports, but is completely broken when viewed on a standard widescreen display? Something like this. I am showing a video where the content shifts or disappears unpredictably in a widescreen format, but it is completely fine in a narrow viewport. Why do I think this approach is better? Well, for a start, it hits people without forcing them to change their perspective. It hits them at home, so to speak. Users don't have to pretend to be someone else. They just experience frustration the way they naturally browse. They get to experience the feeling of getting into a digital experience which works as it should and does what it says, yet it is not designed for them and therefore does not work for them. The problem isn't them, it's the broken design. Instead of thinking, wow, being visually impaired must be hard, and pitying disabled people, they think, wow, this layout is terrible. Now I am furious at bad design. The focus stays on fixing the system, not adapting to disability. One leads to charity, the other leads to change. You shouldn't need to pretend to be disabled to care about accessibility. You just need to experience bad design and get mad about it. Let's talk about some of the limitations and potential new issues that come with this approach. While simulating barriers is a step forward, it is not magic. The obvious first issue is that it can't be seen as a kind of plug-and-play replacement for the simulation of disabilities. To explain what I mean by this, let's take the simulation of color blindness. We could apply a filter to a website to simulate the loss of color perception. If we try to apply our technique of simulating a barrier instead of a disability, we very quickly realize that it just doesn't work for this situation. We can't take the website and change it in a way to add barriers or to make it seem like it wasn't designed for non-disabled people. Simulating barriers isn't a replacement for disabled perspectives. It's a bridge to get teams to care enough to seek those perspectives. We are not here to mimic struggle. We are here to destroy unnecessary struggle at its source: bad design. Earlier, we identified key problems with traditional disability simulations. Now, let's compare the two. Simulating a disability often leads to fixes that don't actually help real disabled users, because the simulation is based on assumptions, not lived experience. Barrier simulations avoid this because the problem isn't tied to a specific disability. Instead of prompting a solution, it simply prompts us to think about barriers and accessibility in a different way. The next big topic is, of course, controversy. To be honest, I can't know for sure that this different approach is free from controversy. There's a good argument that we are still trying to simulate a part of lived experience of people with disabilities in a way that simply does not reflect the whole picture. I actually agree with this argument, which is why I will always insist that the only real solution to the empathy gap is working with people with disabilities and actually listening to them. My reply is therefore focused on why I think that simulating barriers at least does not shift the focus to the disability. It does not center the person with the disability as the problem. Instead, the attention is directed towards the products we create and the barriers they contain. The focus stays on broken systems, not individual impairments. This is why I think this approach might be more useful to trigger the kind of thinking and consideration that we want to see from designers and developers. This isn't about walking in someone else's shoes. It's about realizing the shoes we've designed are terrible and demanding better ones for everyone. With that said, my personal conclusion is that these two concepts can be very useful if applied to the correct situation. They serve very different purposes. If you want to highlight a specific accessibility issue, a simulated disability might be very helpful to improve the understanding for both technical and non-technical people. If you want to achieve a more general mindset shift towards thinking about the barriers we create and provoke conversations and further interest in the topic of accessibility, an experience with simulated barriers could be much more powerful. This realization left me with a practical challenge. How do we turn this concept into an actual experience that serves its purpose? And where can I find simulated barriers? At first, I didn't have a clear answer, which is why I decided to start building some simulated barriers and go from there. Here was the problem. It's surprisingly hard to create meaningful barriers for non-disabled users in digital spaces. I can't change their physical capabilities, but I can change how they interact with my designs. The solution became clear. I needed to use assistive technologies themselves as the barriers. My approach focused on web design, where many accessibility failures occur. Most non-disabled people navigate effortlessly with a mouse and clear visuals. But what if those tools suddenly became useless? That became my goal, to create experiences where traditional tools fail, forcing users to confront digital barriers firsthand. With this in mind, I came up with a list of requirements for a proof of concept that I can use for this purpose. It should be easy to understand, short, engaging, and lastly fun. I quickly go through my thought process of each of these. Easy to understand. No jargon, no technical deep dives. It should just be a simple, relatable digital interaction. The goal is that anyone who uses the internet for their job should get it. Short. This is not a full training course, not a lecture, just a short aha moment. Because this is the appetizer, not the main course. It's meant to spark curiosity, not displace deeper learning. It serves as a baseline for conversations and more in-depth learning. Engaging. If you make the user do something, not just watch or read, it is more memorable. Fun. The topic of fun with this experience is something that I want to talk a little bit deeper about, because it is more nuanced. Fundamentally, we are simulating an experience which is something that non-disabled people are not used to. People with disabilities are used to encountering barriers, and it is definitely not fun. So it is reasonable to say that the simulation of barriers should not be fun either. So why did I set this requirement? Fun is a powerful tool. It lowers defenses. People learn better when they are not feeling attacked. It encourages exploration. If it's interesting, they'll poke around and discover more barriers. Playful experiences are more memorable than dry ones. We reach more people. If the experience is pure frustration, it leads to venting, not learning. Of course, this is a balance act, because if we focus too much on making it a fun experience, the result would be that we lose sight of the seriousness of the issue we are trying to highlight. It's a balance act, and never let the fun overshadow the point. With these requirements laid out, let's talk about the actual escape game. You can find the game at game.ideenquelle-webdesign.de. The game is set up as a website which I created using the tools that I know and use in my work every day, WordPress in conjunction with the bricks builder. Here we have the technical requirements. You need a screen reader and a keyboard. Technically, you can also play the game on an Android smartphone, but I encourage you to use a desktop. You might ask yourself, well, if I'm disabled, can I still play the game? That's a good question. The gameplay is based on barriers, so technically speaking, it is not accessible. But if you use a screen reader in your everyday life, you can play the game, but some of the challenges won't be any challenges for you. And you might ask yourself, what was so difficult about that step? On the other hand, there are some challenges that are more difficult for you, but are still possible to solve. Similar goes if you use a keyboard. Some challenges are no challenges for you. As I spoiled before, that you need a screen reader, what about hearing impairment? You can use the NVDA screen reader, for example, where you can display the text. And with that, you can play. So, finally, let's play. Welcome to Berry Area, a world designed to frustrate the non-disabled. Meet Freddy. The story is centered on a character called Freddy. Freddy has long red hair, wears glasses, and a dark blazer. They live in Berry Area, but have a lot of knowledge about our world. They therefore give us a tour through some of the barriers people from our world tend to encounter on websites in Berry Area. They lead you through digital barriers locals navigate easily. Freddy is a legally blind resident of Berry Area who knows our world well. Their role? They are your helper. They give hints when you're stuck. It was important to me to normalize disabled expertise. We often see disabled people as the ones needing help in the media, but rarely we see them as the helper. I want to change that. The second role for Freddy is to encourage us to think about the barriers in our own world. They do this by asking questions and providing some examples. Let me introduce you to this world properly. Berry Area is very similar to our world. On the surface, it may not even look that different until we look more closely. All public spaces have floor markings to guide you. If you want to cross the street, you better listen closely, because the traffic signal doesn't provide a visual indication, just an acoustic one. Signs, books, and menus are in Braille by default. I'm sure you can imagine some other parts of this world. It is important to me that we do not think of Berry Area as some kind of utopia. It isn't objectively better than our world, it's just different. In fact, many of its features would be inaccessible to people with certain disabilities in our world. That's because Berry Area wasn't designed for disabled people, it was designed against non-disabled norms. It's tempting to imagine Berry Arians as some hypothetical group with mixed assistive needs. But that misses the point. Berry Area isn't for anyone. It exists for one purpose. It's a world designed to spite every mouse user and annoy anyone who relies on their vision. This might seem like overthinking, but it's actually liberating. It frees me from worrying whether simulations are realistic, they are not meant to be, and are not something that would happen by accident. It sent us the truth that all design excludes someone. We just rarely notice when we are the included ones. Now, let's go to the next page. Here's a button that says, "To the next adventure." I am trying to click on it, and nothing happens. What should I do? Well, it's an escape game, so we have to be a little bit more creative. But don't worry, we just learned that Freddy can help us. Whenever Freddy has a border, like here, we can click on them. I do that now, and they provide us with a hint. Many of you have probably already guessed what to do. We need to use the keyboard. And yes, with the tab key, we can get to the button. You can see the focus indicator here. I click enter. And yes, we did it. We accomplished the first of 8 challenges. Freddy gives us some more explanation why it is important to have a website usable with the keyboard. Next challenge. We have a page with a heading that says "Invisible Message." There's a picture with black text on a dark background with the words, "What's the problem?" Of course, we have Freddy with a border who could help us if we are stuck. Freddy also lets us know why alt text is so important, and we learn about possible barriers on websites. That's it. That's the whole page. Before, we had a button that indicated what to do. Here, we don't have any obvious button or link. So, what do we do? Freddy already gave us a little hint. They talked about the alt text. Maybe we should look into that. I'm going to start the screen reader and let it read out the alt text of the image.
Voiceover on Safari. Picture. Vary area. Window. Picture. Vary area. Link. Banner. Link. Image. Link. Deutsch. End of. Main. Heading level. Black text on a dark blue background. What's the problem? Below. In small dark blue text. Add the following part to the URL after .de/headings. Then you will find your way.
Interesting. It told us there's a hidden message that we need to change the URL to headings. So let's do that. That was correct. Alt text is very important for people who use a screen reader. Chaotic headings. All right, on this page we have multiple headings in different sizes. That's kind of confusing. What's this page primarily about? We could ask Freddy or challenge ourselves and see if we come up with a solution. Freddy tells us something about semantic heading structure and, of course, some possible barriers. The focus on the page is about heading structure. If we want to know what this page is about, we could read the H1 heading. But which of these is the H1? We could use a screen reader to find that out.
Voiceover on Safari. Link. Skip to footer. Visited. Link. Deutsch. End of. Main. Heading level 3. Link. Chaotic headings. Heading level 3. Link. What is this? Heading level 1. Link. The path into the unknown.
Okay, now we have the H1 heading level. Although it is much smaller than the other ones, it didn't look like it was the main heading for this page. The screen reader also told us that the heading is clickable. Now, I'm going
Link.
to click
The
on
path
it.
into the unknown.
Oh.
Voiceover off.
And yes, we found our solution and solved the third puzzle. To the next adventure. This page is very short. We have some text in a normal font size and in between some text that is really small. I for sure can't read that. Again, Freddy could help us and we have some information about possible barriers. This one is where I let you figure out yourself how you can solve this puzzle. A little spoiler, this time a screen reader won't help you out, but you will see that for yourself. Also, every challenge is different and you have to be creative to find a solution. Now you got a sneak peek into the game, but what do we actually learn from it? Barriera exposes the truth. Barriers aren't natural, they are designed. I want to use Barriera and the simulation of barriers in general to frame the issue of inaccessible spaces as an artificial problem created by the designers of the space instead of a natural problem that the designer needs to solve. Since the screen reader and keyboard are a core mechanic of this game, users end up learning at least the very basics of these technologies without feeling taught. Of course, this doesn't provide a full picture, and the usage in the game doesn't really provide a realistic use. But it could be a jumping off point for a more in-depth lesson. It can help accessibility newbies overcome screen reader intimidation. I noticed that some web designers who are starting with the topic of accessibility sometimes have reservations using a screen reader for the first time. For them, this could be an easy way in. Even if you had no idea about accessibility before, you learn the basics of digital accessibility by reading the information provided and experiencing digital barriers firsthand. To close, let's revisit the core truths. At the end of this talk, I want to reiterate this point one more time. The real solution to get people to engage with the topic of accessibility is and will always be listening to people with disabilities. No simulation, no matter how clever, can replace listening to disabled people. What the game Barriera offers is, it's a bridge for those who've never considered accessibility. It's a spark to turn awareness into action. A tool to make learning stick so when disabled colleagues speak, their expertise lands on fertile ground. And of course, the understanding that the barriers are the problem. So, while you're creating those job postings, feel free to try out the game at game.ideenquelle-webdesign.de or create similar experiences to change the way your colleagues and friends think about accessibility. Let me know what ideas you come up with, and together, let's make the world a little bit more accessible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Olivia, for that wonderful talk. Thank you for elucidating some of the common problems we're seeing in the hiring space. And also, thank you for giving us a tour of Bay Area. So we have a couple questions, and I have some more personally too. But the first one is, simulation can feel like disability cosplay, as you said, and you suggest that we should listen to and learn from people with disabilities. I understand what you're saying, yet I'm also worried that this puts burden on education on them. How could we balance that?
Yeah, at first, I want to say thank you so much for the question. That's a really, really good point. I would say the important thing that listening does not mean bombarding people with questions. And also, the main point is that the thing I've talked before is you should hire the people, because I'm sure there are many people with disabilities who would love to tell you about everything and just pay them for their service. And I mean, it's a really simple solution, but I think this is, well, an easy way to to balance those two things.
Thank you. And then how do you think that companies could do more or be more aware and open about hiring people with disabilities?
Mm, how they, I would say that they just realize that it is really important that they should hire people with disabilities. It's yeah, they, well, all the things I talked about before, that first of all, they also have customers who are disabled. So of course they should also hire disabled people who can help them with their products in every step of the way. And well, not just in the end with quality assurance, but everywhere. And I think that's really important to notice that we are a society where people with disabilities exist. And you also have to include them in the process of creating products.
Thank you. And then what made you think about creating like, Bay Area and what did you take into consideration, when you were developing some of the different sections?
I was thinking about, well, what is the other way around? Like when people confront barriers in their everyday life, what would be the opposite for a non-disabled user? So how can they also get this experience of getting into a barrier, but in a way they normally browse, like in a way how they use the internet in their everyday life, and then they should just experience, well, I can't get on to the next page or whatever my goal is. And how can I make this into a game? So in this case, for example, with a keyboard, well, most pages are you can use a mouse and it's really easy. But sometimes a keyboard doesn't work on a web page. And now I thought, okay, what would be the opposite? Well, the opposite would be that the mouse doesn't work, but the keyboard does. And that's how I did it. Or what would be the opposite of missing alt text? Well, it would be that there's additional alt text that gives you additional information. And that's how I thought about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Have you been able to test the site with people who use keyboard predominantly?
Um, with keyboard, not really, but I myself, of course, tried the whole game with the keyboard, and yeah, it's possible to play the whole game with the keyboard and with whenever you use a screen reader in your everyday life. In this cases, it works. Yeah.
Okay, and then did you have any final like recommendations or any resources to help those, think more about your talk? Like, do you have a blog or do you have an about section on a website?
I would say just play the game.
Perfect.
And of course, there you can find some information. It is, well, some information for beginners about digital accessibility, what you have to think about when creating a website, which barriers are there or could be there. And so you be more aware of these things, of the barriers. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go close it out with the chat, but we really appreciate your talk and we really appreciate the demo of Bay Area.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you for attending this session with Olivia Richter. You can continue the conversation in the chat or on social media using hashtag WPA11Y day and hashtag WPAD2025. We also appreciate it if you go to 2025.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation. You could also win a t-shirt while you're there. Stay tuned for Built the website with an AI, but is it accessible? Coming up with Janaki Konar, Fahad Lambarti at 12 p.m. UTC. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors page to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. See you in the next session.